Let's begin with a little meditation. To relax your body, relax your mind. Place your attention on your respiration. Or as it said, closely place your attention or your mindfulness on the respiration. Remember to bring your attention away from the inward, away from the sense doors. Sometimes when you're doing the breathing meditation, you can imagine breathing in the inspiration of the gurus, the Buddhas, in the form of white light. And as you, just at the end of the inhalation, imagine that spreading through your body, burning up all the conceptualizing thoughts, all of the wind energy that's inhibiting good concentration. And then as you exhale, breathing out all of your discursive thoughts, all of the distractions, out with the air as though you're breathing out soot from a fire. And then when the mind is somewhat relaxed, bring your attention to the consciousness itself. One moment of mind watching the previous moment, aware of the content of the previous moment of mind, and therefore recognizing its nature over time, the clarity between the thoughts, trying to focus on that, the clear light nature of the mind. Let go again and again. When the mind begins to follow some thoughts, try to sense this spaciousness of the mind within which they're arising, the clear light nature, the womb that gives birth to those thoughts. Then think in terms of the mind-only school, in terms of practice of their view. All the outer phenomena, trees, houses, colors, scents, other friends, objects of the senses, they all seem to our consciousness to be external objects. Quite seemingly unassailably, as though you can't contradict that fact. The Chittamatra view is that all of these perceptions, all these objects take place along with their respective perceptions. The two things, the perception and the object, ripening from one seed on the foundation consciousness, the alaya vijnana. And that this apparent external universe is an illusion. It's our belief in this reality of outer objects, of our desires, or outer objects of fear and repulsion. From a Chittamatra point of view, it's this conception, this grasping, that causes all the other delusions to be activated. This is the prime mover, in addition to the subtle selflessness of persons. Here it's the sense, like the lower schools, of a self, which is not a different entity than the aggregates upon which we label the self. Not different as the non-Buddhist schools would have, yet not identical with the aggregates. A self that seems to be self-supporting, existing from its own side, the owner, the observer, the taster, the experiencer. see if you can observe this sense of the I right now. Compare it to how the Buddha said, even in the highest school of tenets also, this sense of I, this perception, grasping to the I, is an erroneous consciousness. Such an I, as we perceive, as we conceive, does not exist at all. Our being is empty of such a self-supporting, substantially existent person. There's just experience. No person, as we perceive, substantially existent behind who's experiencing, other than the mere I, who can be said to be experiencing because the consciousness is experiencing. Yet we and all living beings, constantly enmeshed in cyclic existence, trying to get pleasures of the five senses and the sixth sense, the mental consciousness, to be experienced, we think, by me. And tension arises when this supposed experiencer me encounters that which is uncomfortable, unpleasant. Based on that kind of illusion, that delusion, we enter into attachment, anger, other mental factors, other delusions. Never finding what we really seek, real happiness, long-lasting, stable, and deep, profound bliss, happiness. With just a beginning understanding that this self that we have adhered to, we've believed in up till now, doesn't really exist that way, that we could identify our being with the entirety of sentient beings, and all of them are experiencing the same plight as we, cyclic existence. Other than those sentient beings or arhats, of course they're still sentient beings, but not yet eliminated the obstructions to omniscience. All these living beings have been our mother numberless times, depthlessly kind, our best friends. And as Lama Sopa Rinpoche mentioned this last weekend, they surpass even the efficacy of a wish-fulfilling gem, an Aladdin's lamp, at most, which can get us, if we have the karma to find it, the most it can bestow is events of this life, objects, certain success, but can't prevent us from rebirth in the lower realms, can't bring us enlightenment per se. But sentient beings, by cherishing them, the same way one would take care of the wish-fulfilling gem or Aladdin's lamp or whatever, we can achieve those long-lasting goals, everlasting blissful happiness. So for the welfare of all these beings, I myself have to purify my Buddha nature. I have to eventually, hopefully quickly, achieve enlightenment by practicing the stages of the path, developing both method and wisdom, bodhicitta, and the right view of reality. So for that purpose, I'm going to listen to and study the philosophical views that Buddha set forth, not just as mere intellectual knowledge, but in order to make these realizations for the welfare of others, to be less a burden for others, to be less, that my mind be less problematic for myself, that I find the space and time to work for others, to have the courage, the energy, the aspiration to engage in effort. So I'm going to listen, participate in the class in order to quickly attain enlightenment for the benefit, the welfare, to achieve the aim of all sentient beings. Thank you very much. So bring your attention back. So, how are we doing? Some of you are probably a little bit behind because you commuted down to, or up to, down to or up to San Francisco? Up. Which way is north? That way. Okay. So those of you who are watching DVD, that way is north. Is that right?
It's about this way. Steve did a compass thing here as well, but it's about
okay.
that corner over there.
Okay.
Do you know?
Okay. So, any questions about our... Oh, Darlene has a question.
No, the same part that I asked you up there, when I was reading about the Vaibhashika, and where they were talking about where if an object breaks, that mind stops. I think the Vaibhashika.
Right. Did you notice how she's always positions herself exactly so you can't get her photo? I had to bring a mirror one time, so I'll foil her. I'll put a mirror here so we can see. You can see Oma Darling. She's very. It's only spot, only that little tangent right there that you can't get in the whole room. So Oma Darlene was asking in San Francisco, and again she's brought up a good question about this idea of the Vaibhashika's sense of conventional truth. Do you remember? Yeah.
When I was asking about memory.
Right.
And,
okay.
And I was trying to figure out then where does memory come in, because I don't remember it saying anything in the Vaibhashika.
There came that right there.
And so I was trying to think, what would be a definition of memory in the sense of...
well, let's go back to the first question again.
What kind of consciousness is it?
Let's go back to the first question again and then and elaborate on that. So Oma Darlene was asking about the meaning of... She's recalling the definition of a conventional truth for the Vaibhashikas. So, Carrie, do you remember sort of what the meaning of a conventional truth for the Vaibhashikas, the first of the Hinayana tenets? That's good. Okay, I'm trying the hot seat here.
Yeah, I want to say that conventional truths. I don't know if I can come up with the right words right. I think that it's that perceiving that objects are real would be conventional truth, whereas ultimate truth would be that objects are impermanent.
No. Does anyone remember? Remember, for the Vaibhashikas, they had a special meaning of a conventional truth and an ultimate truth. An ultimate truth was something that the perception of which was not, the perception of that was not damaged by either breaking it into parts, physically, or by intellectually analyzing it into parts. Say, for instance, if this robe would not be an ultimate truth because you could, in dividing it, the threads, if you separated the threads, the perception of robe would disappear. You'd have a big pile of threads, and at that moment there would not be a perception of robe. Although, as Oma was saying, you might have a memory. You might say, "Oh, there used to be a robe," but the perception of the object has disappeared when separating it into parts. Or like a vase or mug. If someone were to break the mug with a hammer, classic example of the vase. The perception of vase, then, well, there's a bunch of pieces. You don't perceive the shape that you consider a vase. You might have a memory of it, but that's not considered to negate this. If the perception of something is damaged, if that mind disappears, the perception disappears when you break or separate it, that's a conventional truth, right? If it's an ultimate truth, it would not be so destroyed. So for the Vaibhashikas, who remembers, did you catch up, Frank? Do you remember for Vaibhashika, what's an example of an ultimate truth? What is the perception of which is not damaged by that?
I'm thinking that uncompounded space was an example.
Uncompounded, so permanent things. And what else? There were some impermanent things also that were uncompounded space is right. Analyzing that, you still come up with space. You still have the perception of space.
Something to do with time?
How about the partless atoms, directionally partless atoms?
I have a little trouble with that because I'm not sure there is such a thing.
Well, yeah. In fact, you were probably proto Sautrantika in your former life, because they criticized the Vaibhashikas for that very thing. I'm not sure such a thing exists. They would say that anything that, if there were such a particle that didn't have directional parts, they use the terminology directionally partless, that would mean that the east side would be identical, would be, co-present with the west side. And everything would end up to be sort of just a point. So, the other schools don't accept directionally partless atoms or smallest particles, but the Vaibhashikas do. And so they would say if you break up things into atoms, maybe we would say in the West you break them into molecules, and the molecules into their atoms, and the atoms into their nuclei and electrons and everything. You come down to some fundamental particles that are irreducible. That's kind of the sense of an ultimate truth for them. Irreducible particles, but even then, they have the feeling there is something that's irreducible. But almost modern science comes to the impression almost every time you think you found something that's irreducible, you always go a little bit further. So memory is a consciousness that is based on, memory is the mental factor, is related with the mental factor mindfulness, right? Memory is a faculty of mind. You can have a remembering consciousness. It's the same word that we use for the mental factor mindfulness. In Tibetan we say demba, in Sanskrit smriti, remember? Or sati. That sometimes refers to mindfulness. The same word also refers to the mental act of memory, recalling something that you saw before. So if you had seen something or thought you'd seen something, maybe you thought you saw Richard Gere up in San Francisco, but you didn't really see. You think you have a remembering consciousness.
But not of him up there. I remember that.
That's what I thought. Okay. So anyone else have a question? How are we doing? I forgot. How do you say your name? Vimal. Vimal. You've been sort of just watching. Any things that strike you? Any questions you want to ask? So we're making this progression through the various philosophical views, and we've touched the first of the Mahayana views now, which is called what? Chittamatra, which means what?
Mind only.
Mind only. Chitta means mind. Matra, not mantra, right? Chittamatra. There's one of the taras that's called Chittamani. The Tibetans say Chittamani. What does that mean?
Wish fulfilling? No.
Mani means what?
Jewel?
Jewel. And chitta is mind. Mind jewel. And so kind of Chittamani has the implication. There's several words in Sanskrit and Tibetan, a couple of words that could be translated as wish fulfilling. So Chittamani, you could kind of translate it as wish fulfilling. So that's a different word than Chittamatra also. Okay, so the Chittamatra school is the first of the Mahayana schools. And Diana, you remember the definition of a propounder of Chittamatra tenets? Or can you reconstruct one?
Yeah. I think I'm remembering it more from the book, not from this text, and I know that the definition is relative. But a propounder of Mahayana tenets or Buddhist tenets, who don't assert the existence of external objects, but they do assert the true existence of other powered objects.
Okay, in our text, Jason Trukey Gelson takes self-cognizers. They say that they are truly existent because that kind of, most of the Chittamatrans are talking about self-cognizers, as are some of the Sautrantikas, most of the Sautrantikas, and some of the Madhyamakas, the Sautrantika Madhyamakas. Really, only schools that refuted are the Vaibhashikas and the Prasangikas from the two ends of the spectrum. That's often the case with some of these things. So here, the definition of a Chittamatra is, in our text, a propounder of a person who propounds Mahayana tenets. So Jason Trukey Gelson's adding that particular fact in to differentiate it now from the Hinayana, so we know these are Mahayana tenets, and does not assert external objects, but does assert self-cognizers to be truly existent. So, what does it mean to propound Mahayana tenets? Don, what do you think? Do you know?
They accept the Mahayana sutras.
They accept
the Mahayana sutras.
That's one thing. We sort of bandied this around before, wasn't it? That they would accept that the Mahayana sutras are the word of the Buddha, and that there is a state of enlightenment that more than the one person every, the universal teachers who come, like Shakyamuni, more than that can attain. Some of the Mahayana schools, like the Chittamatrans, there's two different groups, right? The false aspectarians, the true aspectarians. So some of them assert that all sentient beings will achieve enlightenment eventually. The other group asserts that not everyone will achieve enlightenment. Some people end up in the hearer's vehicle, and not only in the vehicle, but in the fruit of that, which is what? What's the results of the hearer's vehicle? Mark, do you know? Nirvana. The hearer's, we'd have to say the hearer's nirvana, because the fruit of the Pratyeka Buddha, the solitary realizer's vehicle, is also arhatship, but it's a slightly different kind of arhatship. They have greater kind of, pardon? Yeah, the kind of intermediate. And then there's those that achieve through the Bodhisattva vehicle, enlightenment. So here's the Chittamatrans are the first that assert that there's a great number of people like that. Let's see. In this text, is there an actual definition of a Mahayanist? Doesn't have a definition. It goes from Sautrantika to mind only. Okay. So we had talked about, we'd gone through, of these 7 sections, the definition, the divisions, the etymology. What else? Mode of asserting objects, talked about, right? And the mode of asserting subjects, that is, subjective states of mind. And mode of asserting selflessness. So let's review from there, that little section, because we just got past there last time. Did I skip the 5th? Did we not do that last time? What's the 5th?
So the 6th, you're going to go to mode.
Yeah, mode of asserting object possessors we talked about before, right? You remember? Okay. So the manner or mode of asserting selflessness. So all of the, are there some Buddhist tenets that don't assert selflessness? Is that sort of like only some Buddhists assert selflessness? What do you think, George?
We got through the full object possessors. We just got
Oh, okay.
to I marked what the 3rd or 4th paragraph, the false aspect turns assert 6 consciousness.
Okay, we'll go back there. I want to ask Georgie though first. Are there some propounders of Buddhist tenets who don't assert selflessness?
I thought that I might be incorrect, but I was under the impression that all Buddhists, whatever sect or tenet they hold the 4 seals, and one of them is one of the seals is selflessness. I thought wasn't.
All phenomena are selfless and empty. Yeah. So the different interpretation of that, but in all the different schools, but indeed, you're right. So remember, there's a difference here between Buddhists and tenet holder. You know, you might say some Buddhists don't believe in some. There might be some people who call themselves Buddhists who think they take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha from the depth of their heart, but they don't have an extensive understanding, and they might think, oh, selflessness is a Mahayana thing or a Hinayana thing or something. They might not think it's important. But as you say, all of the tenet, anyone who's a holder of tenets, that is, has a philosophical understanding of Buddhism and has investigated what the Buddha said, that is one of the seals that testifies that the doctrine is a Buddhist one, if it does not contravene those 4 seals. What are they? Do you remember the 4 seals? Thea did. Last time she rattled them off, right? Didn't she?
No.
Who rattled them? Mindrel did, right? Who could? Frank, can you remember? All contaminated, or Peter, do you know the 4 seals? All
I've read it several times, but
So we take all contaminated phenomena are
Impermanent?
suffering.
Suffering.
All contaminated phenomena are suffering. All compounded phenomena are impermanent. All phenomena selfless and empty, and nirvana is peace or bliss, right? So sometimes you hear the seals mentioned, all phenomena are suffering, all phenomena are impermanent, all phenomena are selfless, nirvana is bliss. How would you...
What about all phenomena are bliss?
That's nirvana is bliss, only one phenomena is bliss. So how would you object to that? The presentation?
Well, then there's the...
If you said all phenomena are suffering. Well, even the Hinayana doesn't accept all phenomena are suffering, because uncontaminated phenomena are not suffering, like the actual experience of an Arya's mind meditating on emptiness, the uncontaminated path. The Buddha's body, is that suffering?
Depends on what tenet you're holding, isn't it?
Well, they say from Vaibhashika tenet, Buddha's body. That's a true suffering. It has to be abandoned. So the Buddha first attains nirvana with remainder of suffering, but his mind is totally at peace, right? So he has achieved nirvana. And for the Mahayana, of course, not all phenomena are suffering. Now, Lama Zopa Rinpoche on the weekend was talking about, remember we were talking about worldly happiness. What we would, more philosophically, we would use the terminology contaminated happiness. Is the nature of suffering, were you there, Dana? Do you remember Rinpoche's discussion about that? That the things that we consider to be pleasure are merely labeled that by the mind on the basis of one suffering coming down while coming in contact with something else, the suffering of which you is not yet of large enough intensity to notice. When the bigger suffering is going down, it's labeled by your mind as, oh man, this is great. This low-fat Cherry Garcia ice cream I could eat forever. And then it's only at a certain point when you've had enough. Have you tried it? Yeah. Low-fat Cherry Garcia? It's a very good Ben & Jerry's. Have you had, Frank? Very good. It's not uncontaminated happiness, but it's pretty darn close. So as one suffering is go down, actually, one can understand the suffering of Cherry Garcia is being experienced, but because it is of lesser intensity than the greater suffering which is decreasing, we experience that as relief, and we call that happiness. We call that, and the philosophers, Buddhist philosophers, would call it contaminated happiness. So, isn't that all there is? Isn't there? Do Mahayanas say that? How could I say all contaminated phenomena are suffering? That kind of implies uncontaminated phenomena are not suffering. Is there something that's not suffering? What do you think? Unafflicted mind. Buddha's experience is not suffering. There is uncontaminated happiness that the Aryas experience sometime. That's not a result of their contaminated karma. And when they experience something with an uncontaminated mind, a mind that's not grasping to true existence and not attached to it, that kind of bliss can be sustained. It's not something that the coming in contact with, like you come in contact with something that you have anticipation for, desire for, and there's some kind of buzz, first of all. But the longer you're with that, at a certain point you start to get satiated from that. You can recognize that as contaminated happiness. Uncontaminated happiness would mean the longer you remained with that, or in that state, you would remain in bliss. So that would be an experience of the Arya path and the kind of experiences. If you didn't have attachment to things, like the Buddha's experiences, whether you put, Lama Yeshe used to say, whether you put dirty chapati, like in India, cheap, chapatis could be very good, right? Median, there could be good chapatis in India, there could be a lot, let's say cheap chapatis in some little chai shop, or some fantastic, banana bread, or whatever you want to consider. To our mind, one would be experienced as attractive, one would be, and blissful, the other would be experienced as unattractive and repulsive or, suffering or whatever. But to a Buddha's mind, uncontaminated mind, both are experienced equally, continually as bliss, doesn't matter. So that would be there are some things that are bliss, but all contaminated phenomena are suffering. All compounded phenomena are impermanent. So the thing, if someone were to tell you all phenomena, the Buddhist tenet is all phenomena are impermanent, what would you say, Frank? It's not true. Why not? What's permanent? Everything's changing. How can you say that? You're not a Buddhist. Do you have strong enough understanding that you could, strong enough confidence that you could?
Ask the question again.
Okay. Aren't all phenomena impermanent? Everything.
Nirvana is permanent.
Nirvana is permanent. What else is permanent? Space.
Realization of emptiness. Well, I guess that's similar to.
Realization of emptiness is permanent. What do you think? Okay, let's critique frank statement, those of you who studied low rig before. What do you think, Mark? Is it the realization of, what did you say, emptiness? What is the realization of emptiness? What kind of phenomena is that?
It's a conscious phenomenon.
It's a consciousness, isn't it?
And, yeah, so I would think that would be impermanent.
That would have to be
but
impermanent.
Emptiness would be permanent.
We're sending that back to you via messenger. A realization of emptiness might be, let's say to the Buddha's realization of emptiness, might be eternal once he'd achieved that. The mind always remains in that, but that's not the same as being permanent. Permanent means not changing moment by moment.
So you're saying at time, even though it's in the mind, there are times when it's not realized in the mind.
No, I'm not saying that. It's that when you say the realization of emptiness, just as Mark had mentioned,
Consciousness is not manifest at all times.
consciousness, no, even then, consciousness itself is a changing phenomena. Even the Buddha's mind is changing moment by moment. So every moment of his realization has unfolded from a previous moment of the realization. Even though it has the same object of emptiness, that phenomena of realization or consciousness is an impermanent phenomena that's changing moment by moment. But usually, like it says in the Abhidharma Kosha, space and the two cessations, analytical and non-analytical cessations, and as we say, selflessness and other categories of generalities and so forth are permanent. Okay.
Wait, what about emptiness itself?
Yeah, emptiness, the
Yeah.
space, the two cessations. I said selflessness, it includes selflessness of phenomena, emptiness. Okay. All righty, so let's go back here. So Don has reminded us that he hadn't finished the 5th section. I thought I had. So whereabout are we done?
I made a mark right at the Chittamatra assert two types of mind, valid and non-valid.
Okay.
Got a third time.
Okay, the Chittamatrans assert two types of mind, valid and non-valid. Is that kind of unique to them? To the Sautrantikas, they would kind of go, whoa, oh, whoa. See his tea just spilled, that's a whoa. With the Sautrantikas,
They came from an act of generosity.
was that?
Bring her book over to share with me.
Oh, what a sweetie.
Karma.
What do you think, Don? The Chittamatras assert two types of minds, valid and non-valid. Is that kind of like a, whoa, where did that come from kind of idea? Or is that something the Sautrantikas, the lower tenets, would be comfortable with? Why?
Because they assert the same.
They assert the same thing, because the Sautrantikas, many of the Sautrantikas are followers of reasoning, and they follow Dharmakirti and Dignaga's texts, and the whole thrust of that, and in general, is that Buddhism accepts that there are consciousnesses which are valid and those that are not valid. Generally valid, like we said, valid cognitions are those that not only realize their object. For the lower tenets, the validity also means they're fresh. They have a certain vibrancy, power like the engine of a train that can impel the subsequent moments. Remember what Lama Zopa Rinpoche was kept on saying, pursue? Did you catch that when he was talking about to pursue the mind during the talk? You remember that, Georgie? Were you paying attention? You were thinking of something. Was he meaning persuade, or was it another word that he was meaning? When he was talking about you had to do something to the mind.
But diligent?
Yeah, but he did use the word persuade later, so it's not as though he doesn't know, he was temporarily forgetting that. There is a word in Tibetan to induce, or to induce something, dempa, which sometimes is translated as to pursue. Like when you lead the disciples, or you lead the sheep to the corral. We usually think of it as inducing, sort of like from this side. In Tibetan, it can also mean to pursue. Maybe that's what he was talking. I was just thinking of that because that was one of those words that you might not have understood at the time. So Chittamatrans accept two types of minds, valid and non-valid. Valid minds realize their objects and are fresh. Non-valid minds do not realize their objects, right? Carrie? Non-valid minds necessarily do not realize their objects.
I think that would be correct.
Okay, Thea's got it.
Couldn't that also include things like doubting consciousness?
Doubting consciousness would be non-valid, right?
Right.
But so that doesn't realize its object, does it?
It
So
thinks
is
it-
Carrie
it
still right?
does.
Thinks it does.
Right.
It might think it does. Well, doubt might not think it does because it's too pointed, but belief thinks it does. So Carrie's right? Non-valid consciousnesses do not realize their objects, right? Okay, Diana is going to debate with Carrie. So why not?
Because subsequent cognizers realize their objects, they're just not new.
Right, because validity meant to realize the object and to be the first moment of that train. So you can have remembering consciousnesses and other things that are not valid according to these tenets, but they still realize. So not all non-valid consciousnesses don't realize their objects. Okay? So in doing this, asserting two types of minds, not valid, non-valid, there are two types of valid cognizers, valid direct perceivers and valid inferential cognizers. Now that's completely new. We've never heard that before, right? I'm just trying to instigate induce or pursue your mind.
I'm trying to pursue my mind.
You're trying to pursue your mind. Where is it? It's gone somewhere else. So, yeah, done.
Do the Chittamatrans have that prime?
Yeah.
The meaning of prime?
Yeah.
Yes, fresh?
Yeah.
Yes, they still,
For
because,
Valkyrien, that has to be prime for Chittamatrans.
right, because that's, the Chittamatrans, a lot of their texts, they follow the texts of Dharmakirti. And Dharmakirti and Dignaga talked about this quality. From the etymology of the word pramana, right? Pramana, they take as meaning fresh, prime cognizer, like prime beef, prime rib, or prime tofu for the Chinese who are watching the videotape. Okay. So there are two types of valid cognizers, valid direct perceivers and valid inferential cognizers. So Dorjila, what is a valid direct perceiver?
Realizing consciousness. Oh, no.
Why not? You could make your own definition, but when you're trying to hold the tenets of one particular system, you have to use the definitions of that system. But you can make up. If you're a great master, you can make up your own definitions. Just as there are different definitions here than here, but in general, in one system, you can only have one definition of every object has one definition. But it doesn't mean someone else is limited to your definition, because you just have to make a system so that you define everything so it separates it. It clearly separates it from everything else and delineates that one thing. So if you wanted to.
A valid realizing consciousness is not
A valid direct perceiver.
valid direct perceiver. So would that be a consciousness which which is not mistaken in respect to its perceived object?
Not mistaken, consciousness which is not mistaken with respect to its perceived object. It's getting a little bit unclear. Why are your eyes closed? Do you have the definitions on your eyelids, or what? You're trying to recall. Okay. Okay, concentration. Okay. So what if I said this? A valid direct perceiver is a a fresh sense-realizing consciousness. Would that work?
Well, it might still be mistaken.
Well, wait. What was Diana going to say? Or what would Oma, did you say?
No, I was just trying to remember what you said again, that you said.
A sense, a fresh sense or faculty, a sense realizing consciousness. It would be fresh and realizing, and a sense, that would be a sense direct perceiver, wouldn't it? That would be a sense direct perceiver, but that couldn't be a definition because that not everything would be that. There are mental direct perceivers and yogic direct perceivers that are not that, and self-knowing direct perceivers. So in general, it would be what? A fresh, incontrovertible, that's fresh, or new, incontrovertible, knower, free from conceptuality.
You don't need to say it's not mistaken because
Are there, so, okay, now we'll check Sister Diana. So Sister Diana says, if something is incontrovertible, it's necessarily unmistaken.
No, I didn't say if it's incontrovertible and non-conceptual.
Okay, you're, so, okay, getting out of it. So is that true? If something, first of all, if it's incontrovertible, is it necessarily unmistaken? If it's incontrovertible, it's necessarily unmistaken.
I thought that's what it meant, fresh and non-mistaken.
Unmistaken here, in this context, means what? Unmistaken with respect to
Its object.
the appearing object.
Yes.
The appearing object. Conception is mistaken with respect to the appearing object?
Yes.
It's because what appears, the appearing object, is the mental image, and it mistakes that for the actual object. So that's said to be, even conception is said to be mistaken consciousness. But some conceptions are incontrovertible. They realize their objects, right? Inference, for instance. So it is possible to find a common basis, a mind which is both incontrovertible and mistaken. Conception, realizing, inferential cognizer, realizing something, or a subsequent cognizer, realizing something, on the basis of inference or remembering consciousness, which itself is incontrovertible but mistaken because it's mistaken with respect to the appearing object. So she's right there. But how about this? So she's saying if it's, what was it?
I said if it's incontrovertible and non-conceptual.
Okay, if it's
You need to use the word non-mistaken.
okay, so if it's incontrovertible and
Non-conceptual.
non-conceptual, so what kind of things, are you following, Carrie? So if it's incontrovertible, that means it realizes the object, and it's non-conceptual, free from the entity of conception. So that would mean it would be one of the, would it necessarily be one of the direct perceivers? I have to check, because Chittamatra has some special tenets about conceptuality. For instance, for them, an inference, for a Chittamatra, you can have an inference. Generally, an inferential cognizer is conceptual, right? But an inferential cognizer can realize something indirectly. Like, for instance, if you realize that sound is impermanent with conception, with an inferential cognizer. You following? Durja, you following this? You realize sound is impermanent because it's a product or on the basis of some reason. Indirectly, you can realize that it's devoid of permanency. It's empty of being permanent. It's not permanent. But that indirect realization is not a conceptual understanding.
You mean a perceptual?
It's hard to say that it's perceptual. It's an indirect understanding from that you know. So remember when we talked about the Sautrantikas, realize the aggregate, the impermanent aggregates, and indirectly realize that they're empty of a self-supporting, substantially existent person? The emptiness doesn't appear to that direct realization. Remember? So there was a indirect kind of realization that took place. Here, when you talk about an inference, if it's an inferential cognizer, if it's conceptual, there has to be a mental image. But when it's knowing the the fact that sound is devoid of permanency, that is not appearing. There's not a mental image of that. So there's some, Chittamatrans accept some inferential cognition, there's some, something that's realized with inferential cognition that is not the nature of conceptuality, but in general. So you're saying if something is non-conceptual and incontrovertible, it's necessarily non-mistaken. What do you think, Mark? Is that right? This is a good review. Are you following, Peter? These words? Something.
Yes and no.
Okay. Something. So
Incontrovertible.
incontrovertible in Tibetan is miluwa. It's different than non-mistaken, matrulwa. Trulpa here, mistaken, means a particular meaning in these tenets. It means mistaken with respect to the appearing object. So usually sense consciousnesses, are all sense consciousnesses unmistaken with respect to their appearing objects? Then usually there are. Usually sense consciousness is unmistaken with respect to its appearing object. What's an example of a sense consciousness that's mistaken with respect to its appearing object? Frank probably has experienced some recently. Dorji dressed as Santa Claus. How about a blue snow mountain? What is a blue snow mountain? That's something that appears to a consciousness at high altitude, eye consciousness at high altitude. It's actually a white snow mountain appearing as blue, maybe due to the, I'm not sure what the mechanism is, whether it's due to the reflection of the sky you're way up there off the snow and it looks a little bit blue, or whether it's due to oxygen deprivation. But they talk about blue snow mountain.
The actual perception is wrong, not the...
So the consciousness, that eye consciousness, is mistaken with respect to the appearing object. Or if it's said that when you have jaundice, some people say this is not the true case, but I think Tibetans say that it is. When you have jaundice, a white conch, for instance, might appear to be yellow, have a yellowish tinge because of the error in your faculty.
But if you thought you saw Richard Gere at the talk and it wasn't, it was really...
It was really.
Then that's not the
Whoa.
same, because your senses...
His pride has just gone over the...
That's not the same because your sense didn't really perceive...
Right, that's a conceptual thing. That's a conceptual. We're talking about perception. So there are most sense perceptions are unmistaken with respect to their because they're unmistaken with respect to their appearing object. But conceptions are always mistaken with respect to what appears to them, because what appears to a conception is a mental image. Like when you think of your mom, you are knowing your mom via a mental image. Your mom is not the appearing object of that conception. What the mental image or meaning generality is the appearing object.
When you see the yellow conch, though, are you saying that is a mistaken example of perception?
Oh.
Because it's really not yellow, but your perception is yellow due to a...
I was just, the question I asked before was, are all sense perceptions necessarily non-mistaken?
Right.
That means, are they unmistaken with respect to their appearing objects? And so we sort of recalled that they are not all non-mistaken. There are some that are mistaken, such as appearances due to these various causes of errors. Various causes of error, turning a firebrand or moving in a boat or mirage, is it? Okay, that maybe, I don't know. Okay, so let's just check Diana's thing. If it's non-conceptual and, was it? Incontrovertible, that means it realizes object. Is it necessarily unmistaken? Looks like. Because if it's not conceptual, non-conceptual, the only kinds of non-conceptual minds that are incontrovertible, that are the only kind of non-conceptual minds that are mistaken are the ones that are wrong consciousnesses, like seeing the yellow, seeing the snow mountain as blue or the conch as white. Those are wrong consciousnesses. They're mistaken and wrong. So if something is non-conceptual and incontrovertible, it's realized this object, it has to be non-mistaken. Point of order.
No,
No, I have a confusion, I want to get it clear.
Yes.
Incontrovertible means that it realizes its object?
That's the implication of it. Incontrovertible means it can't be controverted by anything else. Other ways we've translated is non-deceived. That's how we sometimes translated it before. Lua means to deceive. Sometimes in some of the pujas, when you cheat or deceive the spirits that are hindering someone, they're called, deceiving the spirits or something like that, lua.
Incontrovertible meant more like it was new. And so, see,
No.
that was, okay,
That's convertible, the new Buick convertible. That's new. Okay, so let's take a little break, and we'll continue, finish up. Okay, so let's go a little further here. Let's go through here. We'll plow through now. So the Chittamatrans assert two types of mind, valid and non-valid. So we know this already. There are two types of valid cognizers, valid direct perceivers and valid inferential cognizers. So it's possible to know things with direct perception, either through the senses or the mental direct perception, like emptiness. You can have a meditative direct perception of that. But there's also valid ways of knowing through conception. Some people in the world don't think that, right? The Buddhists definitely accept that you can know validly. You can realize with conception. And what kind of conception would that be? An inferential cognizer, a particular kind of conceptual state that's come about because of a logical reasoning that you've understood in your mind. You've understood certain, in a smoky kitchen, there has to be fire because smoke exists. Or like on a smoky pass, fire exists because smoke exists, like a smoky kitchen. That would be a correct reason that you might give to induce. Even though you don't see the fire on the smoky pass, you can infer, you can have an inferential cognizer that fire does exist because of your perception of the sign of fire, a concomitant necessary mark that's there if fire is there, smoke, and so forth. So there are inferential valid cognizers also. And then there are four types of direct perceivers, self-cognizing. This is this thing that they're rangrik, that we talked about before, direct perceivers, yogic direct perceivers. These two are pervaded by being non-mistaken, whereas sense direct perceivers in ordinary beings continuums are pervaded by mistaken consciousness. Is that something new? We just mentioned that during the break time, right? Remember? Why are sense direct perceivers in the continua of ordinary beings? I think continuums is kind of an American way of doing it. It's continua, right? Plural. What do you think, Carrie? In the continua of ordinary beings, in the continuum of an ordinary being, mental continuum, why are sense direct perceivers necessarily, that is, why is it pervaded by being mistaken consciousness?
Because our minds are working conceptually. We're not working with the actual objects.
No, I'm talking about sense direct perceivers. So it's not obviously not conceptual. I could make you more precise here. Look what's actually there. Sense direct perceivers in the continua of ordinary beings are necessarily mistaken. How come? What do you think, Frank?
Because we don't perceive things the way they really are.
Which is?
Empty
Empty of what?
of inherent existence, existing from their own sense.
That's not what they mean here. They said even to sense perception, phenomena appear to be external to the senses. And for that, so the Sautrantika say, yeah, no problem, man. They are external. Sense direct perceptions in general, I would say general sense direct perceptions are non-mistaken. It's only the mistaken ones, like we said before, seeing a blue snow mountain or the yellow conch or something like that are mistaken. In general, sense direct perceivers can be non-mistaken. But for the Chittamatrans, all sense direct perceivers in the continuum of ordinary beings are necessarily mistaken because what appears to them is the appearance of external phenomena that are a different entity from the mind, and that is not, for the Chittamatra, that is not the case. Phenomena do not, there does not exist external phenomena that are different entities from the minds that are perceiving them. So those sense perceivers in ordinary beings are necessarily mistaken, because they're mistaken with respect to their appearing object. Does that mean they can't realize their objects? They're mistaken, right? It's all spoiled. No. Mistaken means mistaken with respect to the appearing object, but they can still realize their object, just as a conception can be mistaken with respect to the appearing object and realize its object, say an inference, right? So that doesn't mean that they're not valid, but still kind of this quirk. The Chittamatrans could say, you could have a valid sense direct perceiver, but mistaken. Whereas the Sautrantikas would say that's impossible. You couldn't have a sense direct perceiver which is realizing its object, a valid sense direct perceiver which is mistaken, right? So sense direct perceivers in ordinary beings are pervaded by being mistaken consciousnesses, whereas self-cognizing and yogic direct perceivers are pervaded by being non-mistaken. How come they're non-mistaken? Well, not just mental, because there's some mental ones that are mistaken. Later we'll see the next sentence. Yogic direct perceivers take what as their objects? No. They take ultimate truths. Subtle impermanence, subtle selflessness of person, subtle selflessness of phenomena, and therefore they don't have that sense of duality of the object being perceived as being a different entity from the mind. Also, self-knowing direct perceivers do not have a sense of duality. They just perceive the entity of knowing. So those are said not to be mistaken for the Chittamatra. So this is something completely exclusive to the Chittamatrans, this particular view, that those two are non-mistaken. Self-knowing direct perceivers and yogic direct perceivers are non-mistaken, necessarily, but sense direct perceivers in the continuum of ordinary beings are necessarily mistaken. There are two types of mental direct perceivers in ordinary beings continua, mistaken and non-mistaken. So you can have as said, one Lama, Geshe Tekshok's commentary, when he explained, he said that if you had the clairvoyance is a mental direct perception. If you have a mental direct perceiver, if I know Thea's mind, wow, so nice, so calm. So if I have a clairvoyance that knows Thea's consciousness, it does not, that kind of clairvoyance, it's said in the Chittamatra Tenets, is not perceive the consciousness as a different, it's just knowing the consciousness, the same way that self-knowing doesn't have a difference of entity, of object and subject. So that would be unmistaken, non-mistaken. But other kinds of mental direct perceivers would be mistaken, such as the momentary one that takes place at the beginning or the end of a train of sense direct perception? You have one moment of mental direct perception, do you remember? First moment? First moment. You have, usually it's inattentive, but for the Chittamatras it would also be necessarily mistaken because it appears to be, like to the sense perception, it appears to be a different entity from the consciousness. Direct perceivers are not pervaded by valid direct perceivers. Did we think they would be? Did we think direct perceivers would necessarily be valid direct perceivers? No, we know that the second instant wouldn't be valid, but let's see what they say. Because, although there are form-apprehending mental direct perceivers in the continuum of ordinary beings, there are no valid form-apprehending mental direct perceivers in ordinary beings' continua. What's it saying? Who wants to explain that one? Mark, can you explain that one? direct perceivers are not necessarily valid direct perceivers. Well, we know that in general, but it says, although there are form-apprehending mental direct perceivers, maybe it means to say mental direct perceivers are not valid. I'm not sure. It looks like there's a word missing here. Direct perceivers, there are these four categories, right? It says they are not pervaded by being valid. We know that because not all direct perceivers are valid, because valid, in addition to being direct, they have to be unmistaken with respect to their appearing object, and they have to be, what? They have to be fresh. They have to realize their object. Say, for instance, some direct perceivers are inattentive, right? They're not valid either. So let's see, direct perceivers are not pervaded by valid direct perceivers because although there are form-apprehending mental direct perceivers, what does that mean? That's the example that we gave. Form-apprehending mean the first moment, let's say eye or ear perception, the first moment of a train of perception, sense direct perception, there is one moment of mental direct perception apprehending form-apprehending mental direct perceivers. There are form-apprehending mental direct perceivers in ordinary beings continua, yet there are no valid form-apprehending mental direct perceivers in ordinary beings continua. Why not? No, 'cause that's just about whether they're mistaken or not. How come they're not valid? They're fresh. It's the first instant. There's only one instant, and it doesn't realize. Remember, those are always inattentive. Those form-apprehending direct perceivers are always necessarily inattentive because they only last one moment, so they can't induce a remembering consciousness later. So,
How do they know they exist?
it's written down here.
Would it be an inference?
No, I'm joking. I'm just teasing.
Oh, then would they realize that somehow within the inferential cognizer or something?
Because yogis can perceive, also Buddhas can explain what takes place, and yogis with high development of the mind can actually perceive these events. It says in the continuum of ordinary beings.
Okay.
Right.
So yogi.
Yeah.
Okay, got it, okay.
So you started to give a definition of valid, right? You said something about it's fresh and it's...
Yeah, remember I was trying, because here it says direct perceivers are not pervaded by valid, I think you'd want to say by being valid direct perceivers. So they're saying if something is a direct perceiver, it's not necessarily a valid direct perceiver.
I don't understand what a valid direct perceiver and an invalid, what is the meaning of
Well,
valid and invalid here?
Valid is this word pramana. So are all sense direct perceivers valid direct perceivers? Let's say sense direct perceivers. No, because let's say the second instant of seeing a rose, I don't have a rose, is there a plum? What was it, salted plum?
I don't know what that thing is. I ate it and I still.
Georgie had a gustatory direct perception of this salted plum. Okay, it's wrapped in so many layers. There's not much left at the end. So the first instant of tasting that might be, if you recognize, might be a valid, it'd be a valid direct perception of, say, the taste, sour or salty or something like that. The second instant of that might still be realizing that, but would no longer be valid according to the Chittamatrans or the Sautrantikas, because why? It's no longer fresh. Because not only does it have to realize the object, it has to be fresh. Remember the example of like the engine of a train. Even though all the cars are moving along, like in a train of thought or train of perception, every instant, a couple of instants of tasting that are valid, are realizing the object, only the first moment is valid because it, by its own force, has understood that. The subsequent moments are said to be pulled along by that, their realization. So, to be valid according to here has to be new, incontrovertible knower. It has to be fresh or new, right?
Question?
Yeah.
Regarding this term valid, I'm also wondering too that after that moment of freshness, we say it's no longer valid. Is it because we're not Buddhas?
Maybe valid is not the
becomes
best
an
word to
afflicted-
use. We can say it's no longer prime. I mean, it's no longer pramana. Valid might have other implications in your mind, so you get confused. It still realizes its object, if it's a realizing consciousness. Second is a subsequent cognition. So actually, remember, the Prasangikas throw all of this idea of freshness out. They say, to be pramana, it doesn't have to be fresh. Pra of pramana means main. It realizes its main object. We'll see when we get there. So all of the lower tenets, Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Chittamatra, even the lower Madhyamaka schools say that if something is pramana, it has to be fresh. Only the first instant is pramana, and subsequent cognitions, although they realize their objects, are not pramana. They're not valid or they're not prime. And the efficacy of that is unclear because we don't talk about it. It's still real. The main thing is that the subsequent cognition realizes object. That's the main thing. So the Prasangikas sort of cuts to the chase, or is that what they call it? And gets rid of this etymology of pra meaning fresh, and say pra means main. Realizes the main object. So let's go on. Otherwise, let's try to finish this section today on Chittamatra so we can begin the Madhyamaka next time. An ordinary being's self-cognizer experiencing a form-apprehending mental direct perceiver. Toby, you got this? Okay. An ordinary being's self-cognizer experiencing a form-apprehending mental direct perceiver. So what kind of self-cognizer, where is that self-cognizer located? That's in the mental continuum, right? Not in the mental consciousness, because it's experiencing a mental direct perceiver, apprehending a form. And remember, we said that's necessarily inattentive, right? It's only that kind of direct perceiver apprehending a form. By form, it could mean visible form, it could mean sound, which is form, could mean smell, taste, touch. There is a moment of mental direct perception apprehending that, which is necessarily inattentive. So that consciousness has, as part of its entity, a self-knower, which knows that you were knowing. Okay? So that self-knower, what about that? An ordinary being self-cognizer, self-knower, experiencing a form-apprehending mental direct perceiver, and the second moment of a form-apprehending sense-direct perceiver of an ordinary being are invalid cognizers. It's easy, right, Bill? Why is that self-knower invalid? Well, that's the first moment. Why isn't it prime? It's not valid because it's not prime. It's just like using another word. It's not a dog because it's not a key. Using Tibetan words. Why is it not valid? Because it's inattentive. Because the mind itself, that self-knower only lasts an instant. Also, it's inattentive. So for you to know that you had that kind of mental direct perceiver, I mean, if say for instance it was attentive, then even though the mental direct perceiver apprehending, say, visible form in your mental that one instant, even though that was inattentive, maybe the self-cognizer was attentive. No, the self-cognizer is not attentive. Otherwise, it would remember it saw, but didn't know what it saw, because you can't. The actual mental direct perceiver is inattentive. So both lasting just one instant are inattentive. Okay, maybe he's getting some fine points here. Maybe everyone understands, maybe no one understands. I don't know.
The first one was invalid because it's inattentive.
Right.
The second moment, why is that invalid? I didn't.
Okay, who's going to tell him? Kerry, why is the second moment invalid?
I think it's because it's not fresh.
Because it's not fresh. There,
None of mine.
Hey, Carrie got one right, okay. It was just a matter of time. Teasing. He's done very well. Say there are 4 types of yogic direct perceivers. Yogic direct perceivers that clearly realize subtle impermanence, and then gross selflessness of persons, subtle selflessness of persons, and selflessness of phenomena. So Chittamatra accepts 4 kinds. Valid inferential cognizers, so this is the other kind of valid cognition, right? Inferential cognizers, are necessarily conception. They're pervaded by being conceptual, okay? But if it is an inferential cognizer with respect to a phenomenon, or a phenomena, it should be a phenomenon, right? Singular.
Phenomena?
Phenomena is plural, isn't it?
Oh.
Right,
It should be with respect to a phenomenon. It is not necessarily a conception with respect to that phenomenon. Oh, they've got phenomenon the second time. Because, although an inferential cognizer realizing sound to be impermanent is an inferential cognizer, okay, what is it? Inferential cognizer realizing sound to be impermanent, such as like, sound is impermanent because it's a product, like the sound of a drum or something like that, or like music or something like that. Sound is impermanent because it's impermanent. Sound is impermanent. Sound is impermanent because it's a product. Although an inferential cognizer realizing sound to be impermanent is an inferential cognizer with respect to sound's emptiness of permanence, what's it actually realizing directly? That sound is impermanent, right? It's not realizing it with direct perception. It's an inferential cognizer. It's a conceptual mind. But there's one thing that it's directly realizing. When we say directly, that means, what's another word for directly? As opposed to implicitly, sort of manifestly, what's occurring to the mind is that sound is impermanent. Indirectly or implicitly, it is knowing that sound is empty of permanence, or devoid of permanence, because it knows it's impermanent. It's what's manifestly knowing by that conception is that it's impermanent. Indirectly or implicitly, or some other word you can find, behind the back, whatever, it's understanding. It is understanding that it's devoid of permanence, but that emptiness of permanence, or that non-permanence, or emptiness of permanence, is not appearing to that conception. It is not a conception that the inferential cognizer with respect to sound's emptiness of permanence. It's knowing that indirectly, but it is not a conception with respect to that. Why? This is because if it is a conception with respect to a phenomenon, it is pervaded by the aspect of that phenomena appearing to it. If something is a conception with respect to some phenomena, if you're conceiving something, there has to be a mental image of that appearing to your conception. If you have a conception with respect to something. So even though this inferential cognizer, let's say if I have an inferential cognizer knowing the impermanence of this cup, it's a mental phenomena, right? A conceptual mind on the basis of logic, knowing that the cup is impermanent. You might say that's obvious, the cup is impermanent. If you drop it on the floor, it breaks. But that's gross impermanence, right? Subtle impermanence. So knowing subtle impermanence, indirectly, that inferential cognizer also understands that the cup is empty of being permanent. But that understanding is not a conceptual understanding, even though the inference itself is conceptual. All of these little fine points are preparing us for other kinds of understanding. The Prasangika has a lot of similar kind of arguments. So thinking like this, trying to get your mind around it, is not useless at all. You get my double negative there? Yeah.
Venerable George, can we also use the word, would it be appropriate to use the word experiencer here when we say that in the last paragraph on page 12, the beginning where it says, valid inferential cognizers are pervaded by conception, but if it is an inferential cognizer with respect to a phenomenon, it is not necessarily a conception with respect to that phenomenon. So can we say that it understands its object, not through conception, but through that particular sense faculty having an experience of
No,
an
it's not a
object?
sense faculty at all. It's even knowing the impermanence of this cup or a vase or sound or whatever, all is a mental. It's all inferential cognition never takes place in the senses. Inferential cognition is always a mental activity, right? You infer something. Ah, my son must have a girlfriend because he's doesn't have time to visit his mom or something like that. You make some inference, you know. That's all. It's not. I mean, you may have adduced certain evidence with your senses, but that's not that. Those are only establishing cognitions for the inference. The actual inference is something that you make with your mental consciousness. So this is just talking about that particular kind of thing. This is because if it is a conception with respect to a phenomenon, it is pervaded by the aspect of that phenomena appearing to it. And with regard to an inferential cognizer realizing sound is impermanent, the aspect of sound's emptiness of permanence does not appear to that conception. What appears is the mental image of the impermanence. That, in parentheses is explaining what that means, inferential cognizer, does not realize sound's emptiness of permanence explicitly. It's realizing it implicitly when it realizes impermanent sound explicitly. You know, that's a good word, explicitly or manifestly, okay? As opposed to directly, because you wouldn't say it's a direct perception, right? You could say directly. Okay, so let's go on. Mode of asserting selflessness. Thanks for reminding us, Don, because I was ready to skip over that. I had thought we had done that last time, but there was a lot of grist for the mill there, right? So, sixth of the seven sections, mode of asserting selflessness. The manner of positing examples of gross and subtle selflessness of persons is like that of the Sautrantika, Madhyamaka, and below. So, gross and subtle selflessness of persons. So, what's the gross selflessness of persons? Doji, do? For these tenets? I'm going to wrap up this salty plum. I'm sure I'm going to have it. I may have it later. Apologies to all the Chinese people watching this video. Maybe Sweet Kim is watching sometime, he'll say. Gross selflessness of persons is...
Would that be that the ego doesn't exist? I'm not sure how to...
Maybe Toby knows. Do you know Toby? The fact that the person is empty of being...
Oh, partless.
Permanent, partless, and independent, which is the kind of self proposed by the Vedas, that there is an Atma that is permanent, partless, and independent. In a sense, is a little bit like the Judeo-Christian, well, I don't know if the Jewish faith believes in soul in the same way that the Christian Catholic theology has proposed it to be, but there's a sense of a soul that's ineffable. Seems like you can't deny it's there. You know, God created the soul. It's definitely there, eternal, partless, independent. It's very, very, very similar to the Vedic idea of the Atma. The Buddha said that is, how can I put it? Remember Puba? Remember Puba? You know what Puba means? Just baloney. What?
I thought it was like the chief,
The chief Puba. Yeah, the grand Puba. Maybe it's used that way also. So, in other words, the person, Oma Darlene is a person. She is empty of being permanent, partless, and independent. That particular emptiness is called the gross selflessness of persons. The fact that she is devoid of such a person. Subtle selflessness of persons? Who wants it? Diane, can you?
Being self-supporting and substantially existent.
self-supporting / substantial existent, however you want to say it. The two phrases mean the same thing. They're just kind of qualifying one another, right? So that's the one, that's the sense that is the real tasty one. It's not intellectually acquired. That is the actual innate sense of the self that the Chittamatras say, that is the subtle selflessness of persons, a sense of this head salesman. Like the aggregates are the different salesmen. The head salesman is not differentiated by being a different, a head salesman is still a salesman, right? Or salesperson, right? But it's not one of the other 5 aggregates. Like the self seems to be not different, completely different than the aggregates, not completely the same, but sort of the owner, controller, the head. That sense, if you recognize, it's something that even the Prasangika says is the gross selflessness of persons. Prasangika says that's the gross. All the other schools say that's the subtle selflessness of persons. Have you heard this before, Toby? The sense of, Prasangika is talking about even something more subtle than that. This is what we can start to notice in your own meditation. Try to see if you can notice a sense when the mind is calm, if you're watching the clarity of the mind, induce the sense of self by instigating something dynamic, thinking of someone who's criticized you or unjustly accused of something, and watch how the I seems to be there. The experiencer said, like, what do you mean? I didn't do that, as though it's a real entity existing there independently of the aggregates. That's the one that they're referring to here. Okay. Example of the selflessness of phenomena is an emptiness that is a form, and its form apprehending valid cognizers' emptiness of being other substances. Now, sitting far away and not hearing this before, Toby, you say, what is that talking about? From the Chittamatra point of view, any consciousness which is perceiving an object arises from a seed on what's called the foundation consciousness, the kunshi, we say kunshi namshe, or alaya vijnana, the foundation consciousness. That comes from an imprint on our consciousness at the same moment that one seed, one part, bifurcates? One part becomes the consciousness, the sense of consciousness, the other part becomes the sense of the object. So it said there are no external objects to consciousness. They're just the appearance of that. And the fact that object and the object's, the consciousness apprehending that object being empty of being different substances. They're the same, they're coming from the same substance. That is the emptiness of phenomena for the Chittamatra. Does that make sense, Peter?
Makes
A
sense.
little bit of sense?
But I couldn't repeat it back.
So, but that's what Chittamatra, when they talk about emptiness, they do use the word shunyata. That means that is what the real shunyata is for the Chittamatra. That there's no external world, that the appearance, the way we would say that, let's say the example is sometimes given, blue, the object blue, and blue apprehending consciousness being empty of being different substances. They're empty, those two things being devoid of being different substances, not being different substances, coming from one seed, that's the meaning of emptiness. Although they appear to be separate, like the consciousness is one thing over here, I can move it away and this object stays here. It's just so external phenomena, external world exists out there. So that's what's meant by emptiness. There is another presentation of the subtle selflessness of phenomena in Chittamatra, which is equivalent to that, which I think was alluded to earlier, but what it says is that objects are not inherently the bases of names that we label upon those objects. Like, although, like, almost seems intuitively obvious to a certain kind of mindset, if something was inherently the basis for a name, let's say if Mark was inherently the basis for the name Mark, Like everybody goes, yeah, that's Mark. Excuse me, that's Mark. If it were true, I wouldn't have called him Frank, Sam, Dave, Pat sometimes. Also, as soon as Mark had emerged from the womb, everyone would have said, Mark, because he would have been inherently the basis of the name Mark. So that might sound, on a certain level of investigation, might sound trivial. On another level, it might sound kind of profound. I don't know how it strikes you. But that is not the prasangika meaning of emptiness, but it's something a little bit closer. And it's said to be equivalent in subtlety to this other meaning of emptiness here. These are the two propositions in different of the Chittamatra texts. When they talk about shunyata, sometimes it's mentioned that form and form-realizing consciousness being empty of being different substances. Sometimes it mentions objects are empty of being inherent bases of the names ascribed to them. Those are said to be equivalent levels of subtlety and theoretically can be derived from one another in some way, although I've never seen any kind of way to derive it like that. It's said to be equivalent. Subtle selflessness of phenomena. So, when we talk about the two selflessnesses, what are we talking about? The selflessness of persons and the selflessness of phenomena. And in these two, for Chittamatra, what is the object being negated? In both cases, is the object being negated the same? What is being negated in the selflessness of persons? Subtle selflessness of persons.
Self-supporting, self-existent.
Self-supporting, substantially existent. That's being negated. What's being negated in the example here of the selflessness of phenomena?
The phenomena being a separate entity from the
Consciousness apprehending it. Those two objects of negation are different. Whereas we'll see later in the prasangika, in the Madhyamaka, and especially in the prasangika, and only in the prasangika, the two selflessnesses, selflessness of persons and phenomena, are not differentiated by the object of negation. Here, there's different objects of negation. Persons are said to be selfless because they're empty of being self-supporting, substantially existent persons. Phenomena are said to be empty because they're empty of being of the consciousness and the object, the person, being empty of being different substances. How about, can you have an emptiness of phenomena of Dorje? Let's say if I say the emptiness of persons of Dorje means Dorje's lack of being self-supporting, substantially existent. But I can also take Dorje, the same basis, the person, I don't talk about the form aggregate, but Dorje, the person, the impermanent phenomena Dorje, I can also take that as the basis for the emptiness of phenomena for Chittamatra. Dorje is empty of being what? The consciousness apprehending Dorje and Dorje, the impermanent phenomena Dorje, are empty of being different substances. So for prasangika, the emptiness of the selflessness of persons and the selflessness of phenomena, the same thing is being negated in both cases. Not self-supporting substantial existence, not the fact that form and form-realizing consciousness are empty of being different substances. What's being negated is what? You know from other teachings. It's true existence or inherent existence. The person is empty of being inherently existent. Phenomena are empty of being truly existent. So that's a big difference between these tenets. And then finally, the presentation of grounds and paths, which I was ready blithely to go on to at the beginning. This has two divisions, objects of abandonment and actual presentation of grounds and paths. Do you know this term, objects of abandonment? You don't know this term? You do. So objects of abandonment means what?
When you have to read your mind and you have to, let's see, the objects that are to be abandoned are the
Okay, it's already giving you an idea. Objects of abandonment mean things that are to be abandoned. That means, in what sense? To be a renunciate? What does it mean, object of abandonment?
To abandon things like
What has to be, the meaning of it is, the sense of it is, what has to be gotten rid of, what has to be abandoned to achieve the particular goal of nirvana or enlightenment. So, what are the objects of abandonment to achieve nirvana? Do you know, Georgie, for Chittamatra? Do you have to...
Would that be the obscurations to omniscience?
You have to abandon the obscurations to omniscience to attain nirvana.
No.
Okay, let's give him...
Excuse me, sorry. Liberation, yeah.
Okay, so what do you have to abandon to get to attain nirvana? You have to abandon the conception of a self-supporting, substantially existent person. You have to abandon that ignorance that grasps to the existence of self-supporting substantially. That is the object of abandonment to attain liberation. So that is the obstruction to liberation.
Right.
How about for the Chittamatra, what's the obstruction to omniscience? What's the obstruction? What do you have to abandon? What are the objects of abandonment of the Mahayana path? Is it also the selflessness of persons? That is to say, the self of persons. You have to abandon that ignorance grasping the self of persons?
Well, wouldn't it be for the...
You do have to abandon that, but that's not the main object of abandonment. That has to be realized. You'd never achieve enlightenment if you were still grasping to a self of persons.
For the Yogacarya, it would be the grasping to the concept of outer phenomena being separate entities than the mind perceiving.
Right. So that conception, grasping, that ignorance is also ignorance. That ignorance is said to be the object of abandonment of the Mahayana path. Okay, so they have different, whereas Chandrakirti showed, Shantideva showed in the Buddhist teachings, in the Prasangika, in the Madhyamaka, even the Hinayana Arhat has to abandon grasping the true existence of phenomena. Not only the Bodhisattva, they all have the same realization of emptiness. What differentiates them is the depth of the merit supporting that realization, and therefore the reasoning and so forth that allows those understandings to rise quickly. So let's see how the text presents it here. Deluded obstacles, so that's the deluded obstacles or the klesha avarana. Klesha means afflictions, or we could say afflicted obstacles, or afflicted obscurations. You could translate it all these different ways, right? Klesha avarana. Avarana means veil or obstruction. Klesha, means what? Delusion or afflictions, right? So those are synonymous with the obstructions to liberation, the term that you use. Means the same thing here. Deluded obstacles, including self-grasping of persons together with seeds. What kind of seeds? Apple seeds or what?
Karma seeds?
Means the seeds of the delusions, not the karmic seeds. You have to abandon both the delusions, the klesha, especially the self-grasping of persons, that's grasping to a self-supporting, substantially existent person. The gross selflessness of persons, that's not the main object of abandonment. Even you abandon that, you don't attain liberation. You have to have the subtle selflessness of persons, that the person is empty, being self-supporting, substantially existent, along with the seeds of that, the sabon, that are in the mind, that even though at one moment you might say, oh, I'm completely selfless. I see these beautiful people around me, no attachment. I see these terrible things, I'm completely unmoved. I've abandoned self-grasping. Well, it might be that you've temporarily abandoned it. You have to abandon it from the root, such that even the seeds of it are gone, such that later, when an object that instigates attachment or some other delusion is there, maybe anger rises or attachment rises later. So you haven't really abandoned the delusion and its seed. You have to abandon the seeds of the delusions also. So deluded obstacles include self-grasping of persons together with its seeds, and as well as the three poisons and their seeds. Three poisons being what? Arsenic,
Attachment, aversion, and ignorance.
Craving
a-
or desire.
what did we say? Attachment, hatred, and bewilderment. As we studied in our mind and mental factors case, when you talk about the three poisons, the terms for the second two are different, not anger. When you talk about the three of the root delusions, of the six root delusions, you talk about anger, attachment, and ignorance. Those words that were common with chondro means anger, and marikpa means ignorance. But here there's a different word. So along with the three poisons and their seeds, all these things have to be included. All of these deluded obstacles that arise due to the power of self-grasping of persons. So these are the deluded obstacles. All of these things that arise due to the self-grasping of persons. That means grasping to the person as being self-supporting, substantially existent. Obstacles to omniscience, so those are the things that have to be abandoned to achieve the Mahayana path, Buddhahood, include grasping as true grasping, together with its seeds, its propensities, that means the imprints, not only the seeds of that grasping, but its imprints, as we talk about in the Madhyamaka also, and all mistaken dualistic appearances that arise due to the power of grasping as true grasping, and its imprints and its propensities. Okay, so here's a big question now. You have to abandon true grasping to phenomena as being true, truly existent. Is that right? Who's up on this? Okay, I'm going to ask Oma Darlene, because she's been reading. I know she was studying even when we were at...
But I didn't get to Chittamatra.
You didn't get the Chittamatra?
No.
The Chittamatra, did Chittamatra accept anything as truly existent?
The other powered objects.
Both the other powered phenomena and the thoroughly established are truly existent. Thoroughly established means emptiness, ultimate truth. Both of them are truly existent. Imaginary phenomena, only imaginary phenomena are not truly existent because they're mere imputations of the mind. They have no basis, right? I mean, they do have, even something like space has to be imputed on some object, but this is another question. So only, some things are truly existent. So what does it mean here that the obstacles to omniscience include true grasping that is, grasping phenomena as true, truly existent? That's what it means. How could that be an obstacle to omniscience if phenomena are truly existent? Here's the enigma. Not the enigma. There's the enigma. Here's the enigma. Do you follow what I'm saying? Does it sound enigmatic? Do you see, Frank, what I'm saying?
Ask that question again.
Run that by me again like I was a 4-year-old. The Chittamatra, unlike the Madhyamaka, the Chittamatra accepts many phenomena, all of the impermanent phenomena and emptiness itself. All of that set of phenomena are truly existent. Madhyamaka, both the Sautrantika and Prasangika said nothing is truly existent. But Chittamatra says these things are truly existent. They're really, really true. But here it says the obstruction to omniscience is grasping to true existence. That's something that has to be abandoned.
You have to let it go to get it.
No, not the meaning, although this could try. Here, they don't, when they talk about the grasping to true existence that's to be abandoned, they're not talking about the grasping to true existence of the cup as being truly existent, because the cup is truly existent. Grasping to that as truly existent would not be a problem for them. Grasping that cup to be an object external to the mind, that would be, they would say, that's a wrong consciousness. But grasping this to be true, truly existent, that's not a problem. So when they're talking about grasping to true existence, they're talking about certain category of things. Grasping at imaginary phenomena to be truly existent. Well, you might say, well, that's easy. But what are the imaginary phenomena? A self of persons, the fact that external phenomena exist as different entities from the mind perceiving them. Those are all imaginary phenomena because those are non-existent imaginaries. There are some existent imaginaries, like space and so forth. Some imaginaries do not exist. And so when it talks about true grasping, it means grasping those things to be true. That's to be abandoned. Does that make sense? So it shouldn't, because you might have the qualm, in our text is a qualm, you might have the doubt, wait a second, Chittamatra says all these things are truly existent, and then it's saying here that you have to abandon grasping to true existence. It sounds contradictory, like it's like one of these, the lamas put you in one of these intolerable and, kind of situations. You have to believe this is truly existent, but you have to abandon the grasping to that. So it's talking about it's not talking about grasping to these things as truly existent, it's grasping to the imaginary phenomena, like, say, the self of persons or the self of phenomena, and other things like that as truly existent. There's some other things like that, but that's enough. Then, actual presentation of the grounds and paths. Do we have enough time to finish this, Georgie?
Oh, we got 8 minutes.
8 minutes. Holders of the hearer lineage, that means what? Those who are in the lineage of the Shravakas, holders of that lineage, they've entered into that lineage, they combine the view of realizing selflessness of persons, that's their main object of realization, in order to overcome the objects of abandonment. They realize the selflessness of persons with a small collection of merit, mainly for their own sake, although they do have compassion, and even in the Hinayana they call great compassion, but it's not the same meaning of great as in the Mahayana. When they say great compassion, they mean all sentient beings I have compassion for, and all types of suffering. That's great. I mean, that's more compassion than we have. The Hinayana Arhats, you might say, oh, they don't have great compassion like the Bodhisattva. They have much more compassion than we have, but they don't have the great compassion in the Mahayana that takes the burden upon oneself of alleviating that suffering. Okay, so they do use the word great compassion, but they don't have the same meaning as the Buddha's great compassion. So they, mainly for their own sake, and due to meditating for at least 3 lifetimes, attain their enlightenment. So in general, the Hinayana path, becoming a monk or whatever, usually in the Hinayana path, hearers, solitary realizers, they say one becomes a monk, renunciate, and on the basis of then collecting merit, observing the vows and so forth, develops concentration, single point of concentration, on the basis of the practice of the higher training of morality, accumulating merit and developing mindfulness, then one develops the higher training of concentration and the higher training of wisdom on the basis of that concentration, realizes the selflessness of persons, and within 3 lifetimes, possible, can achieve nirvana. Usually not before 3 lifetimes, apparently, in these tenets, but maybe within 16 lifetimes. Difficult for hearers to achieve nirvana after 16 lifetimes. It's like, because the main thing in the Hinayana is this incredible renunciation, privation. The Mahayana doesn't put the same emphasis on, although you have a greater renunciation in the Mahayana, in a sense, what's considered in the Hinayana to be the greatest of downfalls is the rising of attachment. That's said to be a big hindrance to the Hinayana path. So can you imagine keeping attachment down for more than 16 lives? Whereas in the Mahayana path, for the Bodhisattva, even some rising of attachment is not considered a great impediment to the path. What's considered a great impediment to the path is a rising of anger, because that prevents the bodhicitta. So there's a big difference that how long you can sustain that kind of practice. So usually the Hinayana, they're at it. They have to they have to attain their nirvana very quickly, because it's hard to sustain that kind of renunciation, giving up attachment for a long period of time. Holders of the solitary realizer lineage, the Pratyeka Buddhas, combine the view realizing selflessness of persons. So for the Chittamatra, they have the same realization, selflessness of persons. That means the subtle selflessness of persons, being empty of being, self-supporting, substantially existent. They combine that with a middling collection of merit, mainly for their own sake. They do have compassion, but they don't have the great compassion of the Mahayana. And due to meditating for at least 100 eons, or aeons, Lama Zopa Rinpoche was joking on English and American pronunciation, attain their enlightenment. So they have to attain 100 aeons. So somehow the Pratyeka Buddhas, their practice is different than the hearers. I'm not sure how they enunciate that, because in some of the sutras it mentions, Mahayana sutras, it mentions the hearers have to speedily achieve their goal, otherwise they lose that impetus because of the extreme renunciation. Solitary realizers, however, practice for 100 eons, so it might be interesting to investigate how they're able to sustain that renunciation such a long time. Bodhisattvas combine the view of realizing emptiness. What kind of emptiness? Of subject and object being different substances. That's the subtle selflessness of phenomena, not just the selflessness of persons. They do realize the selflessness of persons. They have to, but that's not their main object of realization. It's the subtle selflessness of phenomena. They combine that with a great collection of merit for the sake of others, and due to meditating for at least 3 countless great eons, attain their enlightenment. So we're going to stop here, but I'll just mention here, sometimes there's a difference between, here it says, meditating for at least 3 countless great eons. I'll have to check the text if that's exactly what it says. Because there's another, in some context, in some of the tenets, not necessarily the Chittamatra, but maybe some others, they say, usually we say the Bodhisattva has to collect, do we say he has to collect merit for 3 countless great eons?
Complete the accumulation of merit and the accumulation of wisdom? I don't know.
Right, but we say the Bodhisattva has to collect merit for 3 countless great eons? Is that what it says? That's what it sounds like superficially, but if you look in the Prajnaparamita, it says the Bodhisattva has to collect the accumulation of merit of 3 countless great eons. What would be the difference?
You might collect a lot of merit really quickly.
Yeah, like say for instance in the Prajnaparamita, there's the famous story of always crying Bodhisattva. I've forgotten the Sanskrit, how do you say? No, that's the Bodhisattva with the long name, right? So, Sarva Nivarana Vishkambini means purified of purified of all obscuration, all avarana. This Bodhisattva is the one who was looking for his guru to understand emptiness. It's told in the long Prajnaparamita Sutra. No. And I forgot the name. He heard from the sky, your guru is so and so, and he went to find this guru, and the guru was in retreat for like 60 years or 600 years or some enormous amount of time. And during this time, he'd never even met the guru, but he had absolute faith. This is the one who could teach him emptiness to make the goal. He would take, because the ground, he wanted to make offering around the place where the Lama was meditating, the guru was meditating. So he even took sticks in his arm and put his blood on the ground to make the dust down. and even was going to sell his body in the marketplace in order to buy offerings for the guru. So with this kind of guru devotion, this is why in the Tibetan tradition, why there's so much emphasis on guru devotion being rapid method to enhance the path. In that way, he was able, I think when he started, he was on the path of accumulation. He'd already developed bodhicitta, I believe, but he, in the course of that one lifetime, which was extended, it was not like in this world system now 100 years, I think, can't remember what the lifespan was, but in several hundred years, he achieved the path of seeing, which would usually take more than a countless great eon of the 3 countless great eons to collect that merit. He collected the merit of a countless great eon in a short amount of time. So there is a differentiation between accumulating merit over 3 countless great eons and accumulating the merit of 3 countless great eons. So we understand in the Madhyamaka and especially in Tantra, it is possible, in a sense, you need to have the accumulation of merit of 3 countless great eons that would ordinarily be achieved in that time. But say through the practice of Tantra, remember when Kirti Senchab Rinpoche was teaching, through the practice of illusory body, union of illusory body and clear light and so forth, you can achieve that merit in a very brief amount of time, in one short lifetime. But it still means that same quantities, some kind of empowering energy.
Do the Chittamatras mean for 3 countless eons?
So I have to check what the text said, whether Venerable Sangha Kando had differentiated that or not. Maybe they do. But some of I think the Madhyamaka, the Prasangika at least, it says the merit of 3 countless great eons. So there's a differentiation. So good, we're getting somewhere. So the next 3 classes, we'll have class next week, and then, oh no, we don't break for Thanksgiving here. It was at the Thursday class we made. And I think we'll just finish this last section of Chittamatra, and then we'll start the Madhyamaka, the last 3 classes. So I think that'll be good. We'll have a nice understanding of that. So let's dedicate the merits at the end. Yeah. Whew. So try to calm your mind to be able to concentrate properly. And think about the merits that you've created through the motivation at the beginning, listening to these teachings. You don't have to limit it to the merits of today only. You can think of all the merits you've created in the past that have not yet ripened, the merits you're creating this lifetime, even the merits of the future you can dedicate. You don't have to dedicate only merits that you've created in the past. You cannot dedicate merits that have already ripened and are depleted, but you can the merits that have on your mind stream, karmic imprints that have not yet ripened, especially the ones created today, and rejoice about those. How rare it is in the world that people would be motivated for some period of time to dedicate, to motivate at the beginning, that their action be for the benefit of all, to eliminate all the hardship in the world and the confusion and the sorrow. I've created merit today. Due to this merit, that's one of the spheres, recognizing the merit, then aspiring